thoughts as the doctor looked through the microscope at the cell sample he'd taken. And then I felt my heart burst through my chest and drop to the floor as he told me the most terrible news I'd ever heard. "Christine," he said, "I don't know how to tell you this, and I wish I didn't have to, but these tests are positive not just for HSV-1, but for HSV-2 also. I'll run a blood analysis for you too, but I'm 99% sure the results will be the same. I'm really sorry." I threw up. Literally, I grabbed the wastebasket that was next to the lab table and hurled into it for about 2 minutes straight, while at the same time feeling the hot tears streaming down my face. All I could think of was what this meant. Having both oral and genital herpes? I mean, I hadn't noticed any outbreak down there, but I'd been so busy with my medical residency I barely had time to sleep, let alone monitor my body. But if what Dr. Langwin was saying was true, and I really did have both type 1 and type 2 herpes, my life was ruined. I would never meet the man of my dreams and have him fall in love with me. Even if I did find Mr. Perfect, and he did like me, it could never be. The second I had to tell him, "Sorry, Mr. Perfect, but I have not just one type of herpes, but 2 types of herpes," it would be over. It doesn't matter if you're the most beautiful woman in the world. The moment a guy knows you have herpes, he sees you as some kind of skank. And I'd never do that. I'd never tell him or any other guy who wanted to start dating me that I had genital and oral herpes, which meant I was going to be lonely for the rest of my life. And that's not to mention the embarrassment of outbreaks. I'd have to spend every single day in constant fear of another outbreak, of having to lie to friends, family, and coworkers every time those scabbing sores started appearing around my lips and mouth, or feel the secret and dirty shame of knowing I'd had an outbreak down there. People would look at me and think I was a slut, even though I'd only been with a few men and had always used protection and had never had a one-night stand in my life. My life was over, and I would be damaged goods until the day I died. I left Dr. Langwin's office with a prescription for Valtrex in hand and headed directly to the pharmacy. Then I went straight to my apartment, got into bed, and didn't leave again for 7 days. When the outbreak finally did go away, and I finally did return to work, I felt like everything was different. Even though my sores were gone and there was no sign of my herpes anywhere, it still felt like people knew. And when John and I were forced to work together, I felt like I couldn't even make eye contact with him anymore. Because while in the past I'd imagined us eventually dating, or being together long term, that was no longer a possibility. Well, the months continued to pass and I didn't have another outbreak, but the medication was starting to take its toll on me. The Valtrex made me feel constantly nauseated, like I was going to puke. So I switched to a cyclovir, but that was even worse as I quickly started noticing that my hair was falling out in clumps. I researched famciclovir, but found out it caused dizziness, drowsiness, and even kidney problems. And on top of all this, there was still the obvious but deeply frustrating fact that none of these medications actually cured the herpes virus. They simply masked the symptoms while making you sick. So once again, I paid a visit to Dr. Langwin's office. I hadn't spoken with him since he'd called to tell me that the blood test matched the cell culture, and it felt extremely embarrassing for me to go see him face to face again, as he was not only my professor, but also one of the few people in the world who knew my shameful secret. But despite that shame, I was desperate to know if there were any medications I could try that weren't plagued with side effects. Or better still, if he or anyone else in the country were any closer to finding a cure for the herpes virus. And so I walked through the door to his lab yet again, put on my best smile, and asked him to share the most recent research on the herpes simplex virus with me, to tell me anything at all that might suggest there was hope. Well, asking a man who has spent his entire life researching viruses to tell you about how one of them works is a lot like asking the musclehead at the gym to tell you about working out. Their eyes light up and they'll talk for hours. That was exactly the case with Dr. Langwin. But instead of being bored by what he had to say, I was absolutely fascinated. He had a way of explaining how the herpes virus works,